right, so I'm on page 49. So after we get done with this chapter, and we'll spend a bit of time on this chapter because this example that we're going to go through, it's all based on stuff that's in this chapter. Let me tell you first what you're going to know and what hopefully at least you're going to understand after we get done with this chapter. Okay? It's very similar to an assignment I gave to the class last year. What we're going to do is we're going to start with this. All right? Where's the other one? This is something that I wrote because, of course, I don't have anything better to do. So I guess I was just goofing around. And so sat there and wrote this. It's fairly simple, even though there's enough code in it. A lot of it's just the 50 states. But wrote this thing to do some validation in JavaScript. Okay? And you click check form, cannot be empty. Well, it'll check everything to see whether or not it's empty. Does that make sense? I don't want to go through every check, so it'll do that for you. But notice if you come in here and you write, so if I put in a valid number, so if I put all that stuff in other words, if everything, at least conceivably everything that's in there is valid, and I click check form, it echoes out all the stuff. First name, last name. So I did that because as I was doing this, I set it up so I would be able to validate while I was going through it. And I just left those checks in there. All right? So it comes back, required fields checks passed, social security number validation passes, alpha checks, so all the fields that had to be alpha, they pass. Zip code validation passed. Username, well, I made it too big, so that's not good. But, so, 1, 2, 3, 1. All right. So the username passes, the email passes, the age validation passes, the phone number passes, the birthday check passes. So all fields pass validation. Ideally, at least, that's pretty simple, what I just showed you, at least conceivably. I've got handouts. I'm not going to give them out right now. I'll give them out in a bit. But what I have in there is this code. All right, it's also out there on the system in a folder with today's date on it. But I've got a copy for you of the HTML file and a copy for you of the JavaScript file. Well, what we're going to end up doing when we go through this is we're going to take that line right there and comment it out. What's that going to do? If I comment out that line, what's it going to do? There'll be no JavaScript, and since all the validation was being done via JavaScript, there won't be any validation. So basically, it'll take anything that's put in there. What we're going to do is we're going to replace that. And we're going to replace the on submit return validate stuff that's in there. We're going to replace that with form ID, name, etc. And then we're going to say action equals post, all right, and method equals post, action equal, and we're going to call a PHP file that's going to do all the validation on the server side. Does that make sense? And we're going to do it as a separate file. Then when we get done with that, when we get done doing it as a separate file, all right, then we're going to go back and see how we could literally take this index.html file, make it an index.php file, and put all the code, both the PHP code and the HTML code in the same file. We're going to do that. All right. Then I'm going to, after we've done that, we'll talk about include files and a few other things. And then after we do that, I'm going to give you an assignment that's going to look somewhat similar to this. All right. I'm going to give you I'm going to have you create a form. I'll give you the fields, and I'll want you to do some validation. But especially those in here who don't have a lot of coding experience, hopefully this will help. All right, and it'll make a lot more sense after we do that. All right. So if you look in your book, chapter 3, again, which starts on about page 49, is called HTML Forms and PHP. And they mention in there, the chapter covers the basics of creating HTML forms and explains how the submitted form data is available to a PHP script. Now, there's a bunch of examples that are based off of the form that you see on page 50 in the book. All right, just so you know. I'm not going to run through those right now, but they go from fairly simple to a little bit more complex. What happens with the first example or two that's in there, you've got that form that you see in part A on page 50. If you leave any field in there blank, when you run the script, all it does is it comes back and it says you must submit this complete form. It's something like that. All right, so all that's checking for is an existence of something in every field. But again, looking at the example that we just looked at a second ago, start to think about this, okay? For instance, social security number. Are you going to force the person with a social security number to put it in as number, dash, number, dash, number? All right, because in most people, if you see this, you think social security number. I do at least. I mean, again, I'm not saying everybody does, but most people do. However, when you see this, that may or may not look like a social security number. So what we're going to do when we validate this is we're going to require the person to put their social security number in like that. And what that'll do is it'll introduce us to the concept of regular expression patterns to make sure you've done that. All right? First name is not a real hard one, not a real easy one. We're going to expect that the first name can be any letters. Uppercase, lowercase, it doesn't matter. But it can only be letters. So, again, we're not going to be handling people from other countries when they've got, like in Germany where they have the two little dots over their name, or Spanish where they've got the tilde. We're not going to handle that. We're not worried about international apps right now. We're just going to do it in here. Then we're going to come to the last name, which is a little trickier, because some people literally with their last name, it's a hyphenated name. Other people have an apostrophe in their name. Sometimes people put names in there, Julia Louise Dreyfus. I don't know with her if she puts hyphens in or not, but let's pretend she doesn't. And she might consider that to be her entire last name. So in other words, for the last name, what we're going to say is you can have blanks, okay? But it can't be blank, but you can have blanks, all right? Or blank spaces. You can have an apostrophe. You can have hyphens, all right? Now, that can get real tricky because how many hyphens do you allow? How many apostrophes do you allow, etc., that kind of thing. And we'll look at that when we get into it, all right? Address. We're going to say that it can have letters. It can have numbers. It can have blank spaces. Now, but think about what else it'll have. If I say, 6004 South County Road G, and if I put CTY, some people might put a period in there, all right, after county. So we'll have to think about the stuff that we want to put in there, all right? What's that? Yeah, you're right. It could have hyphens. Yeah, it's possible. All right, and it's not even impossible that, you've got O'Rourke, Pennsylvania, where it would have, the same kind of thing. So we'll start thinking about that. The city, same kind of stuff when you think about it. Or, so again, the state, that's the easy one. Unless we want to change this to, instead of having it default to that, have please enter a state here. The zip code, we're either going to allow number, or we're going to allow number, dash, number. It'll be one or the other. That's going to be it. All right? The username, notice it says 6 to 8 characters. Well, then we've got a decision to make. What are those characters? Are we only going to allow letters and numbers? All right? Are we going to allow letters, numbers, and special characters type of an idea? All right? So we'll have to worry about that. The email, it'll be a little bit more straightforward than you'd probably think when we get to that point. All right? The age, again, I mentioned this earlier. We're going to set it up so that you can put in an age between 1 and 125. All right? I don't know of anybody who's ever lived more than 125 years. There could be someone. I'm not going to worry about that right now. And again, you'd say, well, geez, what about 1? There's nobody who's 1 that's going to do this kind of thing. However, as an example, when my nephew was born, the first thing his dad did, literally after he left the hospital, was he went online and he registered him so he was in line for Packer tickets the day he was born. All right. So don't think that people don't do things like this, because depending on what it is, they might. All right. The phone number, what we're going to say is we're going to give them two different ways that they can put it in. They can either put it in parentheses, your area code in parentheses, with a space, number, dash, number, or three numbers, dash, four numbers. You with me? So that's going to be it. And the birth date, we'll set it up so you have to put it in month, / day / year format. So there'll be quite a bit of validation that we do in here. All right? Plus, we're going to suppose that every single field that you put in here is required. Okay? And we could put a message at the top in here that says all fields are required or whatever. But as we start working with this, we're going to change that from this. We'll just add the word PHP in there. Yes. You could do that. PHP isn't exactly set up for that, so that would be some programmatic stuff for you. I mean, you could literally set it up where you would check, for instance, in here, you could check and you could see if they had 9 digits, and if they didn't have any dashes in there, you could manually put them. I think that's what you're asking. Kind of like what they have in Access, where it puts it in for you automatically. All right, when you do a mask, you could set up a mask, but we're just going to assume that it's going to have to be in that format. All right, just because of the fact this is already going to be a long enough program. All right, and if we started thinking about I mean, it's a good question, it's a fair question, but when you start to think about everything, then you realize why there really and truly is a lot of job security for programmers in this field. When you think about it, because it's input validation. What you want to do is idiot-proof the program. Why? You want to set it up so any idiot can run it. All right, and saying idiot I know is derogatory, but at the same token, some people that they're going to just be putting stuff in here, and I can come in here. One of the things that we'll do, we haven't done it yet, but in here, you know this already. We can come in here, for example, and just as an example, I'm going to go over here to zip code, okay? And I can put in here where we've got the zip code, I've got the name and everything else. And I can put in here placeholder equals, and I can put in something along the lines of, so placeholder equals, use number, or number, dash, number, format. Something like that. I can do that. Absolutely no problem in doing that. First of all, it's probably now going to be way too wide for the space that I gave it, but we can fix that too. See that? So you can do that. And what is that? Placeholder text, in many ways, what you're doing there, you're attempting to idiot-proof your program. The problem is if somebody gets there and they fat finger or they do something else, you can't make them put it in there correctly. You can alert them that they put it in incorrectly, but kind of going along with what Zane just said, it's like if I put in there, let's say that it's 53547. It would take a lot of work to sit there, and if somebody put an extra 7 in there, to handle that. Now we could write a program. Again, we could get so into it where if you put in your city and you put in your state, we could figure out your zip code. But I mean, think about all the lookups and stuff that would take. It would be a lot of work. It could be done, but it's a lot of work. Even this, like I said, there's enough work even doing that. All right, then if you start adding other country, if you decide you're going to have a country code, I didn't put that in here. We could have done that. But once you put in country codes, things like they call them postcodes, for example, in Europe. They don't usually call them zip codes, and they're set up differently. So that just introduces a whole lot of other stuff that I really didn't want to get into. So it's local, for lack of better words. All right, let's see. Maybe if I did this, it would actually work. So there. Again, we'll put stuff like this in there, but we can't force the user to put things in correctly. The only thing we can do is if he or she puts it in incorrectly, we can keep them there. All right, we can refuse to allow this to go through. What we're going to expect after we go in there and take this line of code that I showed you before, the JavaScript one, all right, and we comment it out, we're going to suppose that the user has turned off JavaScript on their machine. That's why we're doing this, okay? And I've talked about this before in other classes, and you probably have not heard this from me yet, but again, the way that it typically works when you are validating a program is you typically run all your tests on the client side. If they pass and you send them to the server, you run the same tests again, because many people know how to circumvent what's on the client side. Not by turning something off, but by tricking the browser, so to speak, where typically you'll run the same tests on the server side, and it's harder then to trick both the client and the server. All right. So if you look on page 51, we're going to do something like what's shown there. We're going to write our own handleform.php, as they show on step 2 on the bottom of the page. All right. When we first run it, it's going to be a little, not hinky, but what's going to happen is we're going to keep track of every error we have. You with me? We're going to keep track of every error we have. And if there's one or more errors, we're just going to push them off to an error page, and we're going to show them those errors. Okay? Everybody understand? There's a reason that I'm doing it this way. That's not typically the way you do it, but that's the way we're going to do it at first. All right? And I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing that. Why? Because I'm going to show you how to do it without using arrays, and then I'm going to show you how to do it using arrays. And I mean, if you've never worked with arrays before, by the time we get there, it's not hard. The syntax is just a little bit different. And it's when the first time we do it, we're just going to keep building this huge string. So if you come in here and you're doing all this stuff and you basically leave everything empty, all right, you're going to have a big string, and it'll say on the social security number required, then on the next line, first name required, then on the next line, last name required, etc. But it'll be one huge string that we're going to manually build. All right? But then after we get done with that, we're going to do it again, but we're going to create an array. And then we'll talk at that time why it might make more sense to actually do it in an array as opposed to doing it in a string. All right, so we're going to handle a lot of the stuff that's in here. Now, if you look on page 52 at the top of the page, what I'm not putting in here is things like with the name, like Mr. and stuff. I don't really care with stuff like that. So we could add that stuff. And as your instructor, I, of course, always reserve the right that when I give you the assignment, I might ask you to have a drop-down like this with Mr., Mrs., Ms., etc. All right? I haven't finished your assignment yet, so I'm not sure exactly what it'll have. All right. So on page 54, they talk about choosing a form method. If I do fill up all these fields, wish I'd left it in there, but that's fine. Whoops. All right, if everybody would look on the screen here for a second. I filled the stuff in the form, and I'm clicking check form. All right, yeah, it'll give me all this stuff. Boom, boom, boom. It's got to run through this. I will comment that stuff out eventually. All right. All right. Hopefully you know this. When we run this, eventually we won't have file and all this stuff here. But basically what this is right here up till right there, that's the name of our file. That's what it is. Now, if you go after the question mark, notice social security number equals, it's all that information that we entered. That's the query string. All right, we may or may not have talked about this in other classes before, don't remember. But that's the query string. Hopefully you went over something like that with Arinda in the 157 class. By default, meaning unless told otherwise, HTML always assumes that if you're going to send something, you're sending it via a GET. Did you hear me? It assumes you're using a GET, which means it puts that stuff in the query string like you see right there. There's problems with putting things in a query string. What if one of the fields I had in there, even this one, I'm passing the social security number as clear text. in there. If somebody is able to go and grab what I'm sending across the wire, they could find out my social security number. So normally you're not going to use get, you're going to use post. All right? Which with post, all that information is still there, but it's at least somewhat buried inside of your HTTP header. If somebody knows what they're doing, they can typically still get to it, but it's a much harder process. Most people don't have the sophistication, that they can go in because they just don't understand what to do. Now, if you care, if I just went over that and you never saw it before, all right, it's one of these, but I thought it was called post versus get. What's the difference? Because there used to be a real nice little article on that. What's the difference? Again, I'm not sure if it's still here or not. You can find them all over the place. Might be this, that Stack Overflow. But it's all over the place, all right? Now, if I ran that program that you just saw, this one, and I said method equal post in there, you wouldn't see anything. All this stuff that you see right here in blue, all that stuff would be gone. You wouldn't see it. All right? That's an advantage of using post. The disadvantage of using post is when you post, you can't bookmark. When you get, you can bookmark. An advantage of using post is when you post, you can, depending on the browser, you can typically send at least a meg worth of information in a post. All right? Usually, when you're using a get, it's basically throwing it into a cookie. So there's about 4K worth of information that you can put in there. All right? Much, much, much less. But you're going to see both as we go through here. Then when we get into page 57 here, we're going to receive the form data. Okay? When we first write this, we're going to write, if you look here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 fields. Not asking you, I'm telling you, I just counted them. All right, when we first do this, I'm going to show you the difference between these. We're going to write one function that's going to cover all these if they're all required fields. You with me? One function. All right, and all we're really going to have to pass into that function is the name of the field. And if there's something in it, it'll return true. If there's not something in it, we'll say the name of that field we passed in is required, you didn't put anything in there. Now, that said, that's not typically the way it's done. Typically, you make a check for each field individually. All right, because you may want to do something special with each one of the fields. So we'll look at how to do that both ways. All right. If you want a little bit more on get versus post, they talk about it a little bit more on page 57. All right. Just so you know, I showed you this the other day, but I'm showing it to you again. You're going to see this many times in this class. That's everything you post gets put in there. That's everything that you send with a get that gets put in there. All right. Now, they talk on page 59 about something that's called magic quotes. We're not going to concern ourselves with that. Magic quotes was something that basically PHP did away with in version 5. I may have mentioned this the first day of class, but magic quotes were a security hole that was in PHP. It allowed you to circumvent the way you should do things by doing things really what was technically in a legal way. And a lot of people were burned on that because people found out information about them that they shouldn't have been able to find out. So that's been fixed. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about displaying errors on page 61. Just so you're aware of this. All right, I may have shown you this before. If I did, sorry, I'm not trying to bore you or keep throwing the same stuff at you all the time. But if I go in here and someplace in here, where is it? This is my php.ini file. Somewhere in here, all right, notice with error reporting, and it's in here someplace else. But if you want to sit there and tweak the way that errors are reported, notice if I do this, if I come through here and I remove that, now that line is active. All right. As I told you this morning, if you're going to do that, please make a copy of your INI file. But we'll look at that, and we'll look at how errors are basically set up by default inside of PHP. You can always override that stuff too. If you turn up to page 64, they talk about error reporting. And they show you the built-in PHP error reporting constants on the bottom of page 64. Well, the one that we're going to use is E_all. That means anytime you find anything that could be erroneous, show it to us. And that's what you get by default anyway. So we'll talk about that in some more depth when we get to it. Now I want to just very quickly show you, because there's not really much more left in the chapter here, but what I want to really quickly show you here, all right, starting on page 67 is where this language really gets its power. All right, and I don't know if I saved it, and if I did, what I even did with it. Of course, I probably don't have it anymore, but we're going to look at it anyway. I'm just grabbing all of the book's code, all right, and I'm just copying it over to my htdocs folder, all right. And the file that in particular that I want to show you here is in chapter 3, and it's near the end. Not that one. Not that one. Help me here, would you? Let's see where it says it is here. It says that it's 3.6. Okay, do I have 3.6 here? There it is. Why is it showing me the calculator? I don't know. That's not 3.6. All right. If you look in your book, okay, on pages 68 and 69, all right, and we look at that particular example that's on page 69. Doesn't look like much. You see the thing at the top of the page where it tells you, it says, click a link to say hello. Can everybody see that? All right. And that's what I was looking for on here. For whatever reason, I can't find it right now. But let's say you click Michael. Just grab the first one. All right. Now look at the bottom of the page and look at the HTML source that's in there. It says href equals hello.php question mark name equal Michael. Everybody see what I'm talking about? What you can do with PHP is you can write your own query string with it. And you can append that query string on to the end of your URL. The reason that that's important is, let's say that I'm moving somebody around. I've got an e-commerce site. And I want to move them from the page they're currently on, which is an order page, to a final page where their cart is going to be, for example. I can sit there and pass in the query string the quantity that they ordered, all right, the price of the quantity they ordered, etc. So what you can do with PHP that you can't do with a lot of other languages is to sit there and create query strings manually. And it's not as hard even as I'm making it sound. You say, manually? Yeah. But there's ways that you can do it where you basically write functions and have them generated for you automatically in the function. So you're going to see that as we go on in here. All right. Now that's it, but what I want to show you is this. Real quickly, what I want to show you is when we start to do this, all right, and when I start to write this, I'm going to expect all of you to follow along. I'll give you a copy, but play with it, all right? So we're going to come in here and we're going to write PHP code. And what we'll do is, if you remember all the different stuff that's in here, so we got social security number, first name, last name, address, etc., all that stuff. So what we're going to have to do as we do this is we'll start up and we'll say something like this. $, social security, and actually I can grab them all right from here. All right. So notice here we called it sosecnum. I'm going to use the same names in our PHP program that we use in our HTML file. All right. So since we used in there sosecnum, and in English, what that means right there is what we want to do is we want to grab whatever that user put into their social security number, we want to grab that, and we want to put it into a local variable that's called sosecnum. All right? So I'm going to put a comment right here, and in the comment I'm going to say, okay, suppose I did this with the other 11 fields as well. Does that make sense to everyone? So I've done this. I've said $, first name equals, $, last name equals, and you'll have this by the time we get in here on Thursday. All right, so we've done all that stuff. All right, so now we want to come in here and we want to start doing required field validation. All right, so typically you'll do something like this. First of all, again, it's possible that somebody put in a social security number. I'm not asking you this, I'm telling you this. And the way that people used to fill this stuff out is if there wasn't good validation, they just hit the space bar if there had to be a field there. We don't want that. So we're going to come way up to the top here. Not only are we going to set it to this, but we're going to tell it first to trim this, which means it'll get rid of all leading zeros and all trailing zeros. Now, when we start to go through and do this, we can do a few different things. We can say if empty $sosecnum, which is going to say, is it indeed empty? All right, so that's one way we can do that. All right, another way we can do this, and I'm just trying to show you some of the different types of validation that we can do here. That's all I'm trying to show you right now. We can say if $sosecnum double equals either single quote, and we're going to use triple equals because we're going to learn the right way from the get-go. Or we can say if it's equal to double quote. Any of those is going to be checking it for it being empty. All right? Now, something else I want to show you, but I don't remember because I'm thinking of another language right now for whatever reason, so I'm going to go into PHP. Let's just Google it. There's a thing called string length that's in here. Okay, this is just one of the ones. So what I could also do in here is I could come in here and say if string length of $sosecnum equals 0. That's another way I can check that. All right. Notice they also said in here that there's yet another one that's called count. All right, counts the elements in an array or something in an object. I probably could tweak that and make it work. But just notice I've given you 4 different ways to check and see if something's empty. All right? And there's actually even one more that's a pretty basic one, and that's if not is set $, social security number. So that's yet another one. We're going to talk about what all this stuff means. The problem is, what I'd like to do when we're going through this is I'll explain all these to you, but I'm just going to grab one and use it all the time. You understand what I'm saying? You personally are not impressing me by, Zane does it in on this first field, he does this one, then 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 he goes back up to the top and starts again. I say learn one, be comfortable with it, and use that one, or a couple of them. All right? So we're going to do that kind of thing. Now, I'm just going to I'll grab the one right here that says if it's empty. Okay? So I'm just going to, for now, just get rid of the rest of them. And if it's empty, I can do one of 2 things. I can create a string up here too. I can, so I've done these other 11. Now I'm going to put another thing, and it's called error string. That's just a variable that I'm creating, and it's equal to nothing. So if we left this blank, we could say $error string dot equals, and if you don't know what it means, don't worry about it, social security number is required. So what have we done right there? We're creating a string, and we're going to put in there social security number is required. And just for good measure, we'll put a line break in there afterwards because there may be other errors. All right? Then when we get done, we'll do a similar type of thing. And I think the next field that was in there was first name. All right? I think. Was it? Yes, it is. It's first name. So we'll create a field like $first name equals, and the same kind of thing, trim $_post first name. All right, and then we'll do the same kind of check we just made, but again, that'll be with first name. And if it's not there, so if it's empty, we're going to say first name is required. Now, does that make sense to you? So right now, if we ran this the way it is, and we had nothing in the social security number field and nothing in the first name field, what would end up happening, what would print out on the screen, we'd get this followed by, whoops, we'd get this, and then on the next line, we'd have this. Does that make sense? I'll take your question in a second. What we want to get to, though, this is the important part. What we want to get to in here is eventually we want to stay right here, and we want the error to appear right here in red. And we want whatever is in here to stay in here, because if I put 10 fields in there correctly and I screwed up on 2 of them, I don't want to have to type 12 of them in again, do I? All right. Question. Because the appending thing in PHP is a dot, not a plus sign. So we're going to go through there, and we're going to start on this next week. We're going to build this. I mean, if you want to start, go ahead. But I'm going to have something like this written, and it'll be out there. All right? And so what we're going to do then is we're going to run the form, and when we first start doing it, I'm going to turn off everything except this required field stuff. And I'm going to leave it all blank. And what you're going to notice then is you're going to have 12 error messages that's really one string with line breaks in between them. All right? So we'll do that. Then we'll have to test it. And when you think about all the permutations, that's a real pain in the butt. 12 times 11 times 10, etc., all the different possibilities you have. I mean, there comes a point where you test it with everything in there, with nothing in there, and you do some combinations. All right? So we'll do that. Then what we'll do is, instead of doing this, instead of saying error string like this, we'll come through there and we'll say something like this. $error array equals new array. Okay? Then as we're doing this, instead of doing this that you're seeing right there, then we're going to type in $error array bracket bracket equals that, and then again we'll come down here and we'll say $error array bracket bracket equals, and we'll have in this. Now these are doing the same thing. The output's going to look identical with them, but there's a big difference between them, and this is the difference. I want to show you the difference, and I'll go back to what I was just had on the screen here, but I want to show you this. All right, if I Google and I put in PHP String Functions, all right, and I get there to the manual, if I have it as a string, I can use any of these things on it that you see right there. 10, 20, 30, whatever they are. All right. But if I make it an array, then I can use any of these functions on it. So sometimes you want to be able to treat something like a string, and sometimes you want to be able to treat it like an array. What's kind of cool, though, is when I'm working with this stuff, I can implode and I can explode. All right? So what are those? We talked about those a little bit earlier. If I'm imploding, if I have something that's an array, I can turn it into a string. When I explode, I can take something that's a string and turn it into an array. And the reason that it's important, and the reason I'm showing you this stuff, is sometimes you get your input and it's in a string. You can't do anything about that, but you want to use it as an array. So what do? You explode it, and now you can use the array handling functions. Sometimes it's the reverse. You get things in an array, but you want to handle it like it's a big string. Then you use the implode function. So you're going to see all of that kind of stuff. Like I said, I haven't written this whole thing yet. When we get done, this might very well be close upwards of 500 lines. All right? And I'm not making it that big to confuse you at all, but I'm making it so we can start going through all of the different error handling functions. Because again, what that means is when we get to that point, there's 13 chapters in this book. I've already gone over with you chapter 1, getting started, chapter 2, variables. We just went through chapter 3, HTML, forms, and PHP. We went through chapter 4, using numbers. We went through chapter 5, using strings. We went through chapter 6, control structures. We will be talking about the stuff in chapter 7. So in essence, by the time we finish this project, we're almost halfway done with the book. And before you say, oh my God, then we get into the good stuff where we'll actually build a web app. All right, we'll build a web app as a class, an entire app with multiple pages on it. All right, we might have 3 or 4 pages on it. And we might build, if we have, let's say we have 4 pages, we might build 2 of them as a class and write the framework for the other 2, and then you'll do the other 2. All right, and that's what we're moving toward in here. And we'll do that for a while. We'll get into chapter 8 on web apps, chapter 9 on cookies and sessions, chapter 10 on functions, chapter 11, so we can talk a little bit about files. If you want a permanent copy of this, save it off to a file. Then we'll basically take all that stuff, we'll remember it, but we'll move on. Then we'll add database functionality to this. And that's the last part of the book, which is chapters 12 and 13. That's where I see this class going. All right, so we're going to do all sorts of stuff like this. All right, like I said, for right now, I'll start filling in the stuff, and when I give it to you, okay, I'll give you something on Thursday. Will it work? Well, at least the required field stuff will work, both using an array and not using an array. Those will both work, and I'll start writing the rest. We'll see how much time I have as we're going through this stuff. All right. I've got to go home tonight and finish writing C programs. All right. Questions? Did what we talked about make sense? Okay, I said I'd go till about 4, and it's 3 minutes to 4. So if you want to continue to work on your Java, you can. If you say, hell with that, I've had enough, I want to go home, you can do that too. I don't know, are you contractually bound here till 5, John? No? Yeah. But I mean, if everybody leaves and you want to leave, I have no problem with that. You know, if anybody wants to stay, I'm going to be here anyway. I'm contractually bound. All right, so I'm going to be here till 10 to 5. All right, and again, I'm gonna start writing this, and try to at least get some of it done right now. All right, like I said, at least the required field stuff, I want to do it both with and without an array. I want to get that done, and if I do, I'll throw the whole thing out there before I leave today. Question? Any questions on any of this stuff? All right, because that's all that I had for lecture.